Welcome everybody to this wonderful evening with this wonderful talk by Chandrahas Choudhury, acclaimed novelist, whom I've had the pleasure of knowing for the past several years. Chandrahas has published three novels: Arzi the Dwarf, um, Clouds, and Days of My China Dragon. He'll be probably talking about or showing the books at least, since we have them all in our library. So please feel free to also borrow the books and read at your leisure. He's got this book of essays, which is available for sale right outside. My Country is Literature. It's a very beautiful book. I have really enjoyed reading it and learned much of how to be and become a writer from his book and his work in general. He's also published this. He's also published this anthology of fiction called
A,
India
a traveler's literary companion.
Traveler's Literary Companion. Yeah. So he also writes essays and travel pieces for Wall Street Journal and Condé Nast. He's also got this wonderful piece very recently published in The Week. It's available online as well, but I'm sure he'll talk about it at some length. He's held literary fellowships in a vast array of countries, including Brazil and Germany. I'm sure you can tell us more if anybody has any questions.
Yeah.
Iowa summer program, and so on and so forth. With that, I don't think he needs much more introduction. I will let him take over.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, well, thank you to you all for coming. I should also say, by way of counter introduction with Pallavi, why should it only be one way, that Pallavi and I share at some point, she used to work for my publisher when I published my first novel. So we know each other from that time because she had a life in publishing. But even more importantly, we share a common passion in literature. It's not very often that you meet other people who, the world of literature is so big that you very rarely meet other people who love the same writers as you do, but not another person who loves exactly the same writer as much. So that is very rare, like bibliosynchronicity. Sometimes you can find. So we both have the same passion. I've not asked her this directly, but I do think we agree that she's the greatest living writer of fiction today, Oran Pamuk. So there you go. So when you have that sort of like solid foundation to rest on, when she said, do you want to come and give a talk? I felt, yes, this is a chance to sort of talk and to also proselytize for certain kinds of writing, certain kinds of thinking. And by the way, I made a little mistake at the very beginning, which now I'm not sure how I know how to correct. I assumed when she said send an abstract, etc. It's very hard to write abstracts if you don't do them professionally. And I assumed that this is an ambitious new university. It's like this beautiful campus which I saw yesterday. Even the ground is landscaped into little undulating hills. It's all very perfectly put together, but it is surprisingly, at least to my eyes, missing what I assumed was the greatest degree that you can offer in a humanities landscape. And English literature is now a little outmoded. A literature degree. I thought maybe it is so forward-thinking that it has somehow slipped in literature into all the different sort of humanities disciplines, so that it doesn't have to be even up there as a name. It's there everywhere, like literature can be in the lives of writers. So, but I thought for some reason that I'll be lecturing primarily to literature undergraduates. So I've even forgotten the title of my, but so I thought I would put together, something suitably impressive, given that we would only be probably crossing paths once in our lives. So, give you something to remember me by. But then it'll come back to me. And then when I got here, I realized that this is slightly different prospect, but in a way it makes it even nicer. In the end, perhaps what I would say might even have been so self-evident to literature undergraduates that they would have said, this is nothing new. But now perhaps there can be something new with all of you. Ahmedabad, it seems to me, I've been here a few times in my life. It's a city that takes very seriously the idea of wealth creation. That's a very good start when if you want to come to talk about literature. It also takes very seriously, as far as I can tell, the idea of thrift and savings. Yesterday evening, we had gone to dinner with the son of Ila Bhatt. Somebody might know Mir, but Ila Bhatt used to run Seva, and he said the women of our organization, the four Vedas for them are working, organizing, saving, and service of the other. I thought it was like, like, this is a very nice, what a nice package to put together in a sentence. But saving is very important. And so for all of those who, are young people, the idea of today's talk was to show you how, in the end, the whole idea of literature from the very beginning was to propose some set of values that are in conflict with or a correction of the values of the world. If there was not that space for literature, there would be no reason for writing to exist. If writers were so well adjusted as to believe that the world that is the world that should be, there would be no reason for anybody to write a book at all. Stories would be very sweet little fables of the kind you sometimes see in Chicken Soup for the Soul, some other kinds of that is all that storytelling would be limited to. But seen from the other end of the telescope, literature sometimes single words become magnified to an enormous size in literature. And when one has enough of these experiences, I believe 3 or 4 years in a university can do for you, then one is never the same person again. And I picked 4 or 5. Literature is very fond of big words, small words and big words, and focusing a lot on single words. That's there's no other way. If we even have to, as writers, you are both freed and imprisoned by words. There's no way of making people also other than by using words. You have to find anything you want to do. You have to find some words or some shape of words to do them. And it seemed to me that because literature is so spiritually ambitious, in a way, another way of thinking about novels, it seems to me, in midlife, is it's a kind of religion, but with God taken out. The religion of the novel is human beings. Is a religion, my religion is human beings, and for this reason, literature is not just very interested in the big ideas of life. It also is interested in formulating new relationships between these words. If you can think of truth in a certain way, you can also revise your idea of beauty in a certain way. Then you can take that and then move down the road to democracy. Okay, that's right. That's right. Okay, and so I thought I would spend a little bit of time talking about each of these 5 words that are put together in my title. That's what my title was, the value of a literary education and the values of a literary education. The idea that, although in studying literature, you will gain, in a sense, nothing that perhaps you can present to a prospective employer, except yourself. By the way, last week I was in Aurobindo ashram in Delhi, and somebody said to me something that I think all educators should aspire to. She said, our children have no need of certificates. They are their own certificate. When they go out in the world, people, when they meet them, can see that they have learned something and are worthy of life. And this seemed to me, although these were not kids who were studying literature, a very good ideal for what literature can do for you. That you are your own certificate as a person. And especially given the fact that this Indian century is, the argument of history or politics today is that we have a lot of people, but not enough realized folk, that, there's a great gap between presence as on a voter list, on in a birth register, whatever, and genuine person of the kind literature wants. It seemed to me that this is why all of us anyone who is educated from there on needs to have some relationship to literature, to have some feeling for what is missing in life and what is the possibility of a single written page. Literature punches far more than its weight. And the first reason why I think it does so is a word which has become a little suspect in today's times, for reasons that I think we don't have enough time to go into here. You can pursue the debate by yourself. But beauty. Some people would say that this is, if literature is all about beauty, then what is so great about it? So many others, the world produces beauty every day. You can go down and look at flowers. What is so special about the beauty of literature? But in a way, beauty is central to any understanding of literature and what it does, because beauty is the ideal that separates literature from other forms of speech and writing. In my view, there are one could modify this thesis and qualify it in many ways, but in general, literature is a space where if somebody writes a poem where the meaning or the intention behind writing the poem is very successfully realized, you can still, as a reader, say it's not a good poem because two words are missing from line 16, which so the entire, the meter is lost and therefore we were thrown off track. And it's a space where there is room for different kinds of meaning to be made. And this is why, again, I like Pamuk so much, because in a way, at its very best, literature is both a representation of life and an improvement of it, such that irrelevant details are left out. And this is perhaps, every time, you'll know the feeling, especially of having left a movie hall. And when you look at life after some extended experience of a work of art, something seems to be missing. The details are not properly put together. You feel like correcting life, like, why are you so random? And the counter experience of that is it's for that intensity, that experience of no detail being wasted, that we go to literature. And when you know this, it isn't, I've always found in my life, and especially when I was younger, that when I was destabilized by the world, there is, perhaps someone would say artificial, there's a sense of order in good writing that creates a remarkable feeling of peace. That creates a feeling of peace out of the chaos of life. Yesterday, connected to beauty, then once you open this gateway of beauty, many other values and virtues of literature show themselves. Brevity, the art of trying to say as much as you can in as few words as possible. For the longest time, I used to write book reviews, and the typical space for a book review used to be 800 words. A decent amount of space, and then some of the book review supplements began to feel pressure on space, and I would get emails saying, "Can you cut it to 400 words?" There's not a lot you can say about books in 400 words, but it turned out that when I subjected my writing to that pressure, you had to do all that work in a shorter space, and sometimes you ended up with an even better piece than you would with double the length. And in this sense, I think literature, earns the respect of the reader, because it is the implicit promise of a novel, and even more of a poem, is that no word is wasted. And in a life where, which is a torrent of words, a torrent of images, a newspaper, what will you remember from it? We consume so many words. There is that feeling when you come to literature, some excitement at crossing the threshold into the imagination of somebody who values words so much that no words which are superfluous are going to be presented. Only yesterday, I was reading some haiku. Here's one of them by the 18th century Japanese poet, Kobayashi Isa. There are many things I love about Japanese art and writing. One of them is the focus on the transience of both of life in the big span and of single moments. Even Isa means, according to some translations, Isa, the name he took on for himself, means the steam that rises from tea. But even better, it's a single bubble that rises from that steam. That's the translation of Isa. And something I read this morning, here's the entire poem. goes out, comes back, the love life of a cat. And once you have some sense, you should not, whatever discipline you're doing, you should not leave university without some sense of the aesthetic, not only as a roadway to other goals in life, some sense of the aesthetic as a primary goal in itself. You know, beauty is a space of harmony, of composition, of consolation, of love. It is too important a word to for it to be overwhelmed or co-opted or forgotten even, as it sometimes can be, especially, and this is one problem that is set up by the very fact of studying literature. One could say that one of the paradoxes of literary study is that it takes objects of beauty and turns them into objects of analysis, such that one can even forget completely that what the primary intention behind creating a work of art. Most practitioners I know would, if pushed to this question, would say that they make art to create experiences of beauty, and everything else that they want to achieve follows from that. I.e., you know, there's something about the aesthetic realm that is in itself a source of meaning. If any of you have tried writing poetry in your lives and felt that working in a form is very constricting, you will have realized after a certain point, the form itself begins to give you thoughts that thought itself might not have done. You know, there's something very beautiful about training and disciplining thought. So I also mean to use this time to tell you about the pleasures of creation. You know, very often creation is seen as something, it's not entirely spontaneous and self-willed. There is a relationship between creation and tradition is the force that grounds creation, both in a certain sense of what is achievable, what is not achievable, but even more so in a sense of the possible. You know, as I was saying with this example of a poem, the poem begins to do some of the thinking for you. The novel begins to do some of the thinking for you. And then you are working in partnership with yourself and the form in which you work. And that is a very nice dance as a creator. So there's many, many ways in which beauty as an ideal creates these sparks that never end. It's a very limitless, endless kind of space to be. And you know, we know this from our own traditions. You know, rasa theory, the Natya Shastras. So many. We have a tradition of thinking about beauty for 2,500 years. One of the best people I ever met who thought a lot about beauty and wanted it not to be superseded as any other ideal in art was the painter and sculptor Shakti Mara. He used to live close to me in Delhi. And he's written this book, which I urge all of you to read, The Promise of Beauty. It's a great title. It's not about something that is finished or done. It's about a space that this idea sets up for you. Anytime you have some experience of beauty in your life or in art, you have some sense of the limitlessness of things, of people. I like very much, by the way, a line from the acknowledgements in Pallavi's book. For all the selves I was, for all the selves I will be, this book is my own foundation text, the one I've written. That's a very beautiful sentence, which then, when I say a beautiful sentence, that leads you back as a student to a core question of literary study, rhetoric. The art of saying things in such a way as to make them most persuasive, most polished, most finished, most compelling. And isn't it amazing that we have the one language for those of us who read in English, which has been worked on for 500, 600, 700 years. Yet, if you love a writer, you can recognize a style blindfolded, by which I mean, you know, you don't need to see the name of the name on the title page of a book to recognize a certain way of interpreting the world, a certain place, like a way of punctuating your prose. In all these ways, language is an enormous place of possibility in which to create beauty. And every writer can, using the same medium, create beauty in new ways. Recently, I was in conversation with Nayantara Sehgal. Is this a name to some of you? To me, probably the most beautiful prose style in 20th century English novel in Indian writing. And I said to her, I find her work very spacious because she doesn't use commas in a where 95 of 100 writers would put them. Her language just runs on, very free. And I was astonished when she said she never noticed it. It's rare that either a writer is so self-unaware or else is deceptive. It doesn't want to reveal the method or talk about it. Some novelists are like that. But in sum and substance, beauty is the first value that literary education can give you. From there, you can proceed to other goals. But that is the thing that is absolutely specific to any artistic education, that is not replicable by other kinds of education. That is not to say that as a science student or engineering student, you will not understand the beauty of architecture, forms. It is there everywhere. But literature is a goal specifically devoted to the idea of beauty in language, the one resource that we all have, and the reason and the space in which we can connect to one another and communicate with one another. Words are endless in your life, in your thought, in your talk to everybody. Beauty in literature is about finding the best way of putting those words on the page. The second mm, word I want to focus on is literature's relationship to truth. Now, this is a bit complicated because one would think that the ideal of any discipline is truth. Philosophy, science, and what is it but keeping on chipping away at the idea of what is true, what is not, what is real, what is not. In this way, in this space, literature has a lot to contribute, actually, because the truth of literature is not the truth of objectivity, it is the truth of subjectivity. I.e., literature is pushing against the idea of a single truth. And it is not doing that necessarily in a very theoretical way. Literature aims to persuade us of truth by taking the ground away beneath us and dropping us into truth. It's a shock sometimes, the truth of literature. That is why it is so persuasive. And for me, I think the greatest pleasure of reading novels and of writing them, if I can do that for other readers, is to, and I believe for you, any of those who read novels seriously, I can see at least one copy of my book lying around there. So I'm assuming that many of you are serious readers of fiction. I find the most wonderful thing about fiction is that it only takes a page or two of well-made prose, fictional prose, for us to forget who we are and become the seeing eye inside a story or a novel. And this experience of plasticity, of self-forgetting, is actually a counterweight to so many forces in modern life that it's almost like literature should be part of everybody's diet. It's a diet plan for in an age of narcissism, where one can go bloated on oneself. And there is nothing so beautiful as literature. Even literature is so sly that it has even devised different dimensions of this. This can be a starting point. We read novels to forget ourselves, but in novels, there's at least two kinds of human presence. There's the presence of the people who are in the story of the novel, whose story you follow, but there's also a presence of a voice that is directing the story, what is in technical terms called the narrator of novels. And one of the most delightful tricks in literature, a space that creates both truth and freedom, is when you find an example somewhere. Let's do that. That is why literature really loves outsider type characters, because then you can do lots of things. In the early Indian novel, there's a very interesting trend. Most early Indian novels were written by, by educated people who had some experience of novels, either so they had to be English educated to read the novels of England at the time, Walter Scott, etc. But so many early Indian novels are written by male writers, as is likely given that what society was like at the time. But they all have female protagonists and hero. Even their names are the names of women. Basanti's Dream, Indulekha, Rajmohan's wife. What is going on here? Hmm? What is most attractive about the novel or fiction is the chance to tell the truth of somebody whose voice is, whose perspective yields very interesting results. Here is a passage from one of my favorite writers, Bhushan Bandyopadhyay. Has anybody ever read him? For this book, I got a friend of mine to make some charcoal portraits of the writers I love the most. He made this one of Bhushan. I really love it the most among the 15 portraits in this book. There's something so direct and all-seeing about his gaze. In a story by Bhushan, he's writing about these two boys. This is for any of you who have this book, it's on page 10. He's writing about these two boys, two brothers who live in this village in Bengal. And the older one, Dalu, sorts of thinks of himself as an adult already, because he's older than his younger brother. So in relation to the younger one, he's old. And the two of them like hanging out by the river in the evenings. And one day they see this boat coming down the river, this large ship, and the sailors disembark and ask them a few questions. And because they're very grateful for the help, they say to the boys, why don't you come back in the evening? We'll have some sort of dinner, some sort of party. You can join us. So the older one, this is a fantastic, it's like they acknowledge it's a validation of his selfhood. But so they go home and decide, he tells his younger brother, we'll come back after dark. But this is Dalu, and his younger brother is Santu. And suddenly Vibhuti moves us from Dalu, who's very overjoyed at this invitation, to his younger brother, Santu. Santu wasn't overjoyed at this new plan. How could anyone dare to go down to the river's edge after dark? What about the witch living in the tamarind tree and Chinted about these land? She pounced on little boys and dragged them to the very tip top of the tree. No, sunset was a bad time of day. Santu told his brother his fears. Let's look at the first two lines. Santu wasn't overjoyed at this new plan. How could anyone dare to go down to the river's edge after dark? In the first line, it's the narrator speaking. Santu wasn't overjoyed at this new plan. In the second line, it's still the narrator speaking, but somewhere we have tripped into seeing the world from Santu's point of view. A more logical way of writing this would have been, Santu wasn't overjoyed at this new plan. He thought to himself, how could anyone dare to go down to the river's edge after dark? If you put in that bridge, it would become a more banal passage. Because you take that bit out, we are not given any advanced clue as readers. We fall into Santu's mind. This experience of falling is, to me, the most beautiful experience of literature, where while watching somebody, we don't realize when we become them. And this connects both then to truth and to freedom. Literature is so spacious suddenly, that you don't even know, the gap between human beings, between reality and art, it's all erased just by with a single non-act. You refuse to lead someone into somebody's mind. You just say, here it is. And there's a technical term for this in novels. It's such a terrible phrase that I even feel bad repeating it. I mean, this is one of the problems of literary study, to find ugly words for beautiful things. We need to devote a special, now that literary criticism is 100 in the university is more than a century old, we need to devote a year of in undergraduate text to this problem. It's called free indirect style. You can look it up. There's many good studies of it. But the phenomenon is much more beautiful than the word. Uh, I, I would think that the novelists have found other ways. Bent narration is a very nice phrase. That you're going along a certain path and then you through some switch you fall you take a tangent and fall into someone else. Uh, I am going to here to finish my talk of the little point I want to make about truth. I'm going to read a little passage from um, I want to finish with the idea that not only is literature and fiction and literary art very good at revealing the truths of subjective experience, it's also very good at providing a synoptic picture of the truth. That is, by shuttling between self and society, uh, between public worlds and private worlds, it gives us a sense of a very textured sense of how truth is, how it is constructed, how it changes, how it is felt, how it is sensed in the body. And in all these ways, then it reflects back to the idea of beauty, that truth is multifaceted and it is beautiful when it is revealed in this way. Uh, I'm going to read a couple of passages. When I wrote this book, my most recent book, I also wanted to write something that's analytical, that was also beautiful at the same time. This is my goal in literary criticism, separate from writing novels. So this is my little ode, my little love letter to the greatest passion of my life, novels. The novel is an astonishing literary invention raised over 3 centuries to ever new heights by hundreds of ardent and questing exponents. It is a very capacious, amiable form. It participates in both the quotidian and the ethereal. From my early 20s onwards, I began to feel that although I loved all kinds of literature, it was novels that had first claim on my allegiance. Individual novels can be highly partial to certain moods and subjects, but the novel in general leans towards large-heartedness, complexity, contrast, self-awareness, skepticism, a dissembling sophistication, and a shambling grace. The passions and sentiments of characters are balanced by the commentary and rumination of narrators. Scenes of solitude and private life are set in counterpoint to the world of the street and of society. Magisterial language and highly polished sentences are combined with naturalistic speech and street slang. I.e., in a novel, sometimes bad language can be very beautiful when it reveals something about someone's character. Meaning is met at the level of human drama and also by the form in which the story is cast, by who is doing the telling. Some of the greatest novels are those novels in which the same experience is shown just by changing the point of view of the characters and intercutting between them. The novel is also a sophisticated time machine. In a good novel, the flow of life, highly contingent and unstable, can be experienced on the page. The experience of time is intensified, and all the banal moments and long years of real life are ruthlessly weeded out. Here was life, I thought to myself as I marked up and knocked back a novel every few days. Here was life seen in the round with thrilling, sometimes terrifying intensity of perception. The flow of artfully constructed verbal pictures in novelistic narration was rapid and vivifying. The precisely tuned sentences quickened the pulse, stung the conscience, created a thirst for experience. The more novels I read, the hungrier I became to read more, to live life, at least a couple of hours of every day, with the heightened sense of intensity and significance that they conjured up. The sense of reassurance provided by novels was amazing, like that given to a country by a strong central bank. No matter how long one lived, one would never run out of great novels to read. Even better, novels could provide, for acutely self-conscious souls as myself, a liberating escape from the self. This was the point I was trying to make earlier. In novels, you could get into the minds of other human beings and stay there until you could see reality as much through their eyes as your own. In effect, you became a compound human being, both yourself and someone else. The last page of a novel often felt to me like a devastating farewell from one or all. Sometimes you have to really think to work out which one, from one or all of the protagonist or the narrator or the writer. And just like in life, reality in novels did not easily give away its secrets. to pierce the veil of reality of novels was to gain confidence in doing the same at some point for life itself. You had to work out the code of the book, tune your own receptors to the pitch of the writing, piece together the narrator's worldview from the shards of observation about characters, be alive to the play of irony, the meanings of certain juxtapositions, cuts, and switches of perspective. Novels were written to be read, but novels were themselves readers. They read and interpreted the people within the narrative field, and they also supplied the means to read entire cultures, the lives of distant countries that one might never visit. When I was growing up, everybody, so many educated people I know knew a lot about Russia only by being very conversant with Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and Chekhov. And for them, they had no actual need to visit the country. They felt like, Russia came home. The novel literary history tells us had its beginnings in the birth of modernity in the West. In societies like India and Egypt, Brazil and Korea, it was a transplant. But wherever the novel went, it merged with that world's indigenous storytelling traditions and reappeared with a new face and form, a new way of being. It was the literary version of the traveler who makes himself or herself at home anywhere she goes. That's so much for truth and for freedom. I tried to put these ideas together. Let's come to language. In a sense, literature is also is a defense of the integrity of language against all those other forces in life that would seek to corrupt it. You must have all felt some sense of agitation, when on Independence Day when we were children used to open a newspaper and there would be something about freedom on the title. Now, usually it's there's a full page ad about something but again, with freedom put there, very noticeable, with the freedom to buy, freedom sale, whatever it is. And when we look at it, you feel some sense of outrage, don't you? That like such a big word can suddenly be co-opted with so many other words too. And in a way, I think literature is a reminder to human beings to stay that, dishonesty of very big kinds begins with small corruptions of words, small lies that one tells people or oneself. And it also shows that human life is a continuous struggle to achieve pictures of reality through the use of language. And sometimes growing in language allows you to develop a vocabulary. This is one very good thing about humanities studies. By making so many things, bringing so many things in the realm into the analytical realm, it suddenly gives you, all of you students must know this feeling on a daily basis, like some moment of insight when you realize there are words for things that you didn't know that there were. There are words for certain constellations of ideas. Things reform and take new shape because of language. And one of the very best things that to me novels do is to show us human beings changing by showing how a certain word or idea, some key word in their life, changes meaning for them. Love means something at the start. This is of a book. For that same character, after having some experience they've gone through, when they use love again, it is conditioned by the experience. And without being specifically told so, we know the change in meaning. And then we have to use language to. So in a way, that's why I like literary criticism so much. It is by the way, any of you have tried writing a book review or any piece of literary criticism, there's something very beautiful about literary criticism in that it is the only kind of criticism in which the critique is done in the same medium as the art, as the art itself. You experience something in language and then try and find language itself to describe it. And for that reason, it has a special status. There's music criticism, food criticism, art criticism, but obviously there's a special intensity to literary criticism because you can sometimes. That's why a food critic cannot be competitive with a meal. A literary critic can be competitive with a writer. There are, and I would argue that some books of literary criticism and even some pieces are better than the books that they themselves write about. It's because of this setting in literary criticism, this little quirk, that you can, even in describing, which then goes to show that sometimes if you want to describe beautiful experience in language, that you want to praise somebody, this is something I came to very early, although I couldn't do it. I knew what it was I couldn't do, which was very useful. When I was an undergraduate in Delhi, I recently went back to my old colleges. I felt so much distance. 25 years had gone by. It was hard to believe, but I felt when I met even now when I meet some of my old teachers, I feel embarrassed that we were so unsure of ourselves as students that we had to borrow other people's opinions to present as our own. It showed something about what life was like in India for young. We all brought up with the curse or the tyranny of the right answer, and that like the olders know better than you. Was all against the spirit of literary study, and it's almost hard to believe when you become a literature student that somebody's asking me what I actually think. This can take a while, to both in life and in literature to believe that this is not some deception, that somebody's actually interested in your responses. But one thing I worked out, which a little paragraph I want to read here, about language, the relationship between the language of literature and the language used to write about literature. A certain kind of essay taking pleasure in the texture and traditions of literary language, privileging the majesty and mystery of the creative impulse over the role of historical and material forces in the production of art, aware that if characters in a novel or a poem are not real people, they nevertheless inhabit another order of reality, and their decisions and dilemmas can be the source of the most sophisticated kinds of moral inquiry, and implicitly always asking on behalf of the reader, is this book worth my time? And are the aesthetic decisions made in the narration convincing? This was the sort of essay I loved to read and I aspired to write. It had become apparent to me, in other words, that literary criticism was not just a response to literature. It could itself be literature. Far from being purely an expression of an analytical sensibility, literary criticism can be the expression of the creative instinct by another means. In fact, an especially generous expression of the human spirit, for it bestows close and often complimentary attention for little or no reward to the work of another writer. One slanted but perfectly valid definition of a literary critic is someone who uses up his or her best sentences in the service of someone else's books. I loved it when a literary critic testified to the literary equivalent of goose flesh, when he or she pointed out the radiance of a metaphor, brought out the ingenuity of a juxtaposition, or highlighted the subterranean play and progression of a leitmotif. Each time I absorb one of these points, the space inside my head for literature seemed to become more charged, and my capacity for generalization from the absorption of disparate particulars increased. Literature, after all, does not, cannot, should not explain its own moves and methods. If it did so, it would never have the intensity and ambiguity, the swiftness and the slyness that are the primary sources of delight in literature. Writers desperately needed readers, not just in the sense in which I'd understood it in the past, as buyers who created a market and a literary culture, but writers needed readers in the sense of adepts who, almost as lovers, understand the nuance of every pause in each other's speech and every cadence of their phrases. Readers who could bring to the text a higher, almost religious sense of its force and feeling. A book reviewer was one such figure, making a mark piece by piece, coming to each book as a scientist might do with a provisional theory of literature and allowing it to be transformed and modified in the light of new evidence. Because of his or her amateur status and because of the nature of the book reviewing profession, deadlines, precarity, the play of chance in the arrival of assignments, the wanton destruction wrought by copy editors with their own crosses to bear, little of what a book reviewer wrote would survive the erosive effect of time. But this at least was the aim. become, for every half-worthy book that came your way, the sort of reader the writer had dreamt of, or in the case of very bad books, the sort of reader whom the writer dreaded. Just as importantly, walking this road, one could learn to be both a reader and a writer, and not just a writer of literary criticism. Book reviewing was not only the most vital part of my present in my 20s, it was where my past and my future lined up in a fulfilling, inspiriting way. I cherished the feeling of agency it gave me as a reader, the sense that I was doing something almost as active in making a report of my reading as a writer had done in making a book to be read. There is a world of difference between reading and reading with a pencil in hand, waiting to attack the printed page with marginalia, however callow, and with thoughtful lines and arrows. Even I really love people who make little diagrams and pictures and points. And there's always a suspicion of something self-indulgent about reading for pleasure. But done this way, copying out words, sentences, and paragraphs into the blank pages at the back of the book, reading was work. And if attention be seen as a form of worship, then it was worship too. That's language. And finally, I want to come to my last point, the relationship between literature and democracy. I've had lots of reasons to, these are such big words that one can say lots of very silly, vague and trite things about them, which I will try not to do. So maybe let's begin with something very small and focused. There is a way in which the novel, without ever being interested in elections, representations, the legality or legitimacy of authority, is instinctively democratic. Because when the novel was first discovered, at the beginnings of modernity, there was a transition in who suddenly had the status of being a hero or a heroine or protagonist in literature. Somehow, for all the beauty of ancient and medieval literature, we are hard pressed to find stories where somebody who's not a blue blood or doesn't have a big bank balance or the equivalent thereof in olden times is not central to the story. And somewhere the novel realizes and shows, most importantly, that anybody you pay attention to suddenly becomes the most interesting person in the world. You just have to walk far enough. And even more than that, that the details of people's lives are endlessly charming if realized as specifically as possible. So for instance, when in effect the novel shows us that if you can just hold your attention to somebody, all of us keep in democracies and in big societies, we keep passing each other's faces all the time, and some faces seem more interesting than others. It's fascinating when in your own life you think of those people whose faces or whose personalities did not seem interesting to you, who slowly begin to change color just by continuous exposure to them. A novel is like a time lapse sort of machine, hold your gaze and watch the beauty of the details come through. And again, the novel is a way of showing how different people make up their own truths. I'm to read. We have 10 minutes. Even despite wanting to do all these things, till I was about 30, I was still, I would say, a very limited kind of writer and even quite a limited novelist. And I was imprisoned by my own life, including and I've tried to address this issue in my book. I was even imprisoned by my own bookishness. My love of books really made it very difficult for me to reach out to people. And it was much easier. Much the books are wonderful and I'm all in praise of them. There is a way in which you can stop you as this friend of mine. He's a very funny man. I try to meet him once every week, out for a week every year, just to resuscitate. He said, books are so wonderful. You can carry them anywhere. They don't talk back to you. And when was the last time you underlined something that a person said? So in that sense, books are very comforting and they're a place of refuge, which I enjoyed very much. But there's some ways in which I need to be challenged. And this happened to me by a complete coincidence. When the first book came out, I had some disputes with my mother, whom I still live with then. And after many years, I live with now again. At least there's been a gap in the middle, about 14 years. But anyway, I left home and I thought I'm going to live by myself now in Bombay. And but the greatest of, sometimes I can't say that even in my sales there's anything impressive about my royalties, but I've enjoyed great luck as a writer in meeting people and being thrown into situations. And I found this one-room apartment in Bombay, and it was a stormy. It wasn't exactly the dark and stormy night that wins prizes in bad writing contests, but it was a dark and stormy afternoon when I moved there, and I went down and I was very hungry, and I saw the small glass door, and I walked in. It was a small restaurant, 6 tables across 2 floors, so small. And it turned out to be. I asked, "Aap log kitne time se shuru kiye hain?" Said, "It's only been 1 week." And said, "Aap yahan kitne time se reh rahe hain?" And said, "I've just come today." Brand new faces to show to each other. And both me and the institution became very interested in each other. And it was the best university I ever went to. And from then on, I'm acutely conscious of how our class privileges also allow us to not break boundaries at all and be very comfortable in the world. And that taught me the importance, of always trying to use your power to break this, to open the space between you and someone else. And over the years, I became very friendly with the waiters, and I never had a deep experience of somebody, from a small town or a village in Maharashtra who's, they live 7 or 8 to a room. They had a completely different life from mine. But sometimes I used to make my own food. And this was a Chinese restaurant. The staff detested eating Chinese because they smelt and breathed it all day long. They couldn't be, to dangle a noodle in front of them was to insult them in a way that that you couldn't imagine. And they would make at 11 o'clock when the shutters would go down, then the chef would make Indian food, and they would eat on the same tables that the customers ate at. This was a revelation to me. It never occurred to me. Where does the staff of a restaurant, they eat where the customers eat, only they can't be seen. And sometimes the shutter would be, would be raised 2 feet above the ground. And with my dinner, I could creep in below it and sit there, and we would share our cooking with each other. And this was great fun for me, and to feel that this kind of strange brotherhood realized through commensality. I think this is perhaps food is such a big issue in Indian life that, and such a big taboo, that this is where we have failed as a democracy. Really, our food divides us from each other, and for this one place, it was really a very unifying experience. And after 2 years, I was able to write, which I'd never been able to do, write this before. In many spaces in the world and in the humanities, the expression, the assertion of affection or brotherhood or feeling for another person is taken at face value. In literature, it is not. You have to earn that feeling. Something that you say about loving other people is not valid. The reader has to, you have to create in the reader the sense of that transference. So I felt the only way in which I could write a book about this restaurant was to tell the stories of all the people who were in it, such that the reader felt like he was amongst them. Here is 2 pages about from a story called Portrait of a Waiter as a Young Man. For many, the stories are all told in the voice of the proprietor of the restaurant. He's the organizing narrator of the book, and each story takes these are the two characters. A character in the restaurant talking about other people passing through the world of the restaurant. So I had to realize both voices, the character and the people he's talking about. Hmm? For many months after he first came to work at the China Dragon, the general consensus among the staff was that every day was potentially the waiter Pintu Masurkar's last day at work. The joke amongst them, which often reached Pintu's ears and made him smile with a mixture of embarrassment and self-pity, was that Pintu had in his wallet a permanent unreserved ticket back to his hometown Kolhapur on the Yashwantpur Express, which leaves Dadar TT at 4 p.m. every afternoon. The day that Pintu was fired, at least he would be home to his mummy before midnight, unless he got off at the wrong station. Not that there was a problem with Pintu's attitude, as there has been and always will be among staff members at my restaurant and in the restaurant industry in general. For there is nothing like the restaurant business to test a man's character, and nothing like man's character to test the restaurant business. No, our Pintu was not a sly cooker up of plots and schemes like that wretched Captain Burun, nor was he a slacker like that potato Wellington. He didn't want all the good gigs like getting to ride the bicycle for home deliveries, and nor was he always angling for a raise. He took no pleasure in watching someone else get ticked off, as he could well have done, given how often he was in trouble himself. He had no bad habits like chewing gutka or drinking thara, and I know that he sent half his salary home to his family. Even when he was no longer the junior most of the waiters, he was still the last to serve himself from the pot of staff food. And not only did Pintu not take any extra days off, even on his weekly day off, he could sometimes be seen hanging around the restaurant, pathetically lonely and ill at ease without the very folk who pulled his legs so relentlessly, for this lost soul had no other friends. No, Pintu's problem was just that he was so eager, so sweet, so nervous, and so out of place in Bombay. Forget doing work. He had so many complexes, insecurities, reservations, and doubts that just being a body in space and time was a matter of continuous difficulty for him. For his work, he had to wear a white shirt, black pants, and a black waistcoat. And just this beginning unnerved him. He who had worn cast-offs from his older brother all his life and thought that only rich people wore a second layer of clothing. Now Pintu was a well-dressed waiter in a good class of restaurant, but he did not have the personality or confidence to play this beginner's role in the theater of restaurant life. Or maybe as a director, I was not good enough. Who knows? Then, coming from a small town and a dal bhat sabzi kind of background, Pintu had no understanding what Chinese food was all about. So he could not explain the ingredients and styles of different dishes to the customers with any conviction, other than murmuring things like gravy dish or dry mix, very good when pressed, which can hardly be the way to work up anyone's appetite or get them to order the dishes that make profits for the house. I argued to Pintu, nobody in India actually knows what real Chinese food is all about, especially customers. It's all a big con game and you're just another player. But this had no effect on Pintu. He first had to jump through the hoops of Bombay and restaurant life before he could get to Chinese, which is a lot to ask for any traveler on this, our long, twisting, noodle-like road of life. I'm going to read another page if that's fine. Yeah? The days were short, yet the months rolled by somehow quite fast. Money was earned and spent. The seasons came and went. A motley parade of faces and figures passed through our world. Life, with all its little tunes and troubles, kept on spinning its web. Problems were never completely put to an end, but at least old ones were solved and new ones came to replace them, not to sit on top of them. You know the story. Maybe it's a story of your life too. And somewhere in the midst of it all, I realized one day while savoring my mid-morning coffee at table number 1, the best place for thinking in the restaurant, somewhere in the midst of it all, Master Pintu Masurkar was no longer a liability for the China Dragon. What a change had come over the lad. Just the fact that nobody noticed him anymore showed how he had blended perfectly into the scenery, like one of those animals or birds in the theory of evolution. Only they take 500 years and Pintu had taken 15 months, which is great value for time. His uniform was no longer a showcase of food stains, and he wore it with pride and pleasure. He had studied the other waiters carefully and picked up their good qualities. Now, not only did he not trip on the staircase, he could even balance an extra dish in the crook of his arm as he went up. He had learned to speak Bombaya Hindi correctly, if such a thing is possible, Bombaya Hindi being all wrong to begin with. And not only he integrated himself into the Marathi universe of Bombay, I even heard him sometimes explaining things about Kolhapur, how a certain word was pronounced there, how the sari was draped there, whether chicken kolhapuri was actually an authentic dish of the region or just something made up by a Bombay restaurateur while aiming darts randomly at a map of Maharashtra to, to customers who asked where he was from, showing that he was no longer scared of Bombay or even embarrassed about Kolhapur. Little by little, without any great drama, the boy had remade himself. He had started thinking of himself as somebody worthy of the restaurant, the city, of life itself. And when the others went home to sleep in the afternoons, Pintu actually sat by himself at the computer, trying to learn the basics of Google, email, Chinese food, even the accounting software. And if in the middle of it all, he did the occasional search for Poonam Pandey or Jacqueline Fernandez, I didn't grudge him that. For man's nature and needs are so vast, and what life allows him so narrow. And perhaps even this trespass was a help to Pinto in his relationship with the full half of humanity, for slowly he began to look female customers in the eye and to answer their questions without looking as though he might explode. He began to look forward to taking orders on the phone and put his hand up for home deliveries so that he could learn the names of all the streets and the buildings of our locality. Now that he had grown into the work, he actually liked being in the restaurant. I suppose it reminded him of how much he had changed. And when Pinto finally did go home on the Yashwantpur Express, it was a slick new hero of life in Bombay, carrying presents and stories from the big city, not as a popat or a bondu who had failed and come back to be a small fish in a small pond. Hereafter in his life, Pinto might succeed or fail, but he would always have in his brain the sweet memory of this first victory. Sometimes in our trade, it's even more pleasurable to cook a man properly than a dish. Thank you, thank you. Recently, I went on Mona, thank you for staying for so long. Maybe I'll see you later. I went on my, this is my favorite kind of experience now in midlife. Maybe I was more nervous about doing it earlier. At 44, I feel very happy doing those things. I wrote this piece. I realized for the person, there's distance between me and them. It will never end anymore. The young Indian voter, understanding the mind in this election season. And for 25 days, I had the license to travel wherever I wanted in the country and meet whoever I liked. And I really met some very fantastic souls. And for me, like every few years or months as a writer, there's two questions you have to keep on asking yourself and answering for yourself. The first is, why do I write? It changes. And the second is, what is my relationship to my society, and what is what are my roads to society? Maybe these roads have become blocked up, and to unblock them, you need to head out there again. And although it's physically very taxing, there's some nights and some places where I felt, that, life is just like a dream. I was having a chat with this young man, this taxi driver from Madhubani in a taxi in Kolkata. And he was talking, I was asking formal questions for my story. He didn't even know. I was just asking him questions. How much do you earn and stuff? And off the top of my head, I said, yeah, we all have to earn a living. Only God is free not to do so. And he said, I don't think that's right. Even God earns a living. I said, really? He said, Bhagwan bhi ek manushya hai. I said, this thought could not have come out of any book. It was some original perception of it. And I said, please do go on. I want to hear this. He said, even God works every day for us. It's only when he works for us that we hum unko phool aur prasad chadhate hain. Otherwise, we would not do it. Like, it's only because we feel that he's on our side, or he's doing stuff the same as some full-time work that he keeps up his life. And in all these ways, I suddenly thought, that this was in a way, this is the unspoken or spiritual dream of Indian democracy that we sometimes fleetingly passes in front of our lives. And you feel it more when you're young, and it connects up with your other kinds of idealism, including what finding love, all these utopias that we think of, they disappear as you grow older. And that is why you need new currents of youth always to refresh thought streams in academia. University is a place where older people learn from younger people. You could just upturn the definition, and that would be equally true. That's why I like coming to places like this. And in this way, literature and democracy are very closely connected. I think of my work as a novelist, we all come from very different spaces, languages, cultures, eras, decades. I'm much older than most of you here. But there is one room, metaphysically speaking, or even politically speaking, where we all are together. And we will be seen as that by history. Our individual identities may disappear as time goes on in the centuries to come, but we are all part of a very wonderful space. We are all people of the first century of Indian democracy. The oldest, even our grandparents down to us and our children and too. And if we think of history like that, it does mean that we have some special responsibility to history, which is also what I believe our founding fathers were trying to tell us with our constitution, that here is a chance to set off again on a new path. And the last thing that this boy I met, Sanjeev, this taxi driver written about in the story, said to me, we were talking about politics. He said, politics cannot change our society. Only a society can change our politics. A very profound observation. And if that is so, then it must mean that if literature itself is a portrait of society, then we need to share and live the stories of others to be able to come to some deep perception of what we need to change, all the way up from the way we talk to anybody to even who gets to sit on the sofa chair in our household, or who we eat with. All these are actually very political decisions, as you must. This is I'm talking trite to you. You probably knew it much earlier in your life than I did. I only learned these things a bit later. But in that way, the novel is perfect as a at multiple levels. Literature is perfect as a democratizing force. There is no way of understanding yourself. Another person in the story said to me that when I was growing up in Gujarat, my politics was very passive. Now that I live in Delhi and I work for this feminist collective, I really like speaking to women of all communities and generations. And after I speak to them, I find that I come back to myself by a different road. Almost a perfect definition of what literature wants to be and tries to be, to take you someplace so that you come back to yourself in a different way. And as you, this shuttling back and forth, this walk on the woof of communication through storytelling becomes a space where then democracy can be realized in a way that it cannot be through legal and political structures. And in a way, I also think when India became a democracy, the idea was the critique of some kind of democracy and constitution today, the implicit one through, especially in right-wing politics, is that decolonization was in effect a kind of recolonization, that these ideas and concepts are picked up from elsewhere and then, we put in the Westminster model of parliament, although it really helps writing politics. I think, of course, passport, the whole system, shouldn't be complaining that much. But all these ideas were also foreign to us. And so we need to take back whatever the truths of our society were. Actually, I think democracy was meant to be a moral challenge to Indians. It was meant to make you uncomfortable with your life in new ways. And I also think because of the iniquity of Indian history, when democracy arrived, it was actually a chance to make to set a very high moral and spiritual ambition for yourself, separate from the religious ambition that we have in Indian history. The fulfillment of the self. There was a new way in which these ideas could be formatted to make old goals new and interesting again. And in these ways, I think democracy was like such a timely, it couldn't have arrived any later. The 1950 was great. And that force, that energy, that motor will never run out, no matter what people say. Politically and speaking, democracy could degrade. But it has a spiritual energy, which I also found some of these young people. The politics was in a different realm from their vote. And in these ways, I think literature, by which I mean both fiction and non-fiction, have a lot to give each other. I think Kunal Basu, the novelist, teaches a life writing course here. That's great. You know, this is something that could be a module for any student doing an undergraduate course in literature across any discipline. Life writing is great. When you can make a single portrait of another person's life with persuasive details, you've given yourself a key to a door that you can open again and again. And this is the freedom and the truth and the beauty and even the language, the idea that you have to be very precise in order to be very deep, that literature gives you. So without rambling on for any longer, I'm going to thank you for your close, if not always, sustained attention on a very hot afternoon. And thank you for having me here and giving me the chance to talk about the things that mean the most to me in my life. Thank you. Thank you, Pallavi.
Thank you, Chandrahas, for that utterly delightful talk and very beautiful, very truthful, very democratic, and in lovely language. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please. Also, online students, faculty, anybody has any questions, please. Happy to pass the mic around.
Yes.
No problem.
So thank you for the nice talk. So I am a mathematician, but I like literature. And I see several parallels between what you have said in the beginning with maths. So for example, beauty. So
Indeed.
I mean, there are so many nice and beautiful theorems that we see every day as mathematicians. And about rhetoric, that you said that you can probably recognize the words of a novelist that you know very well. So there is a very famous story about Bernoulli, who wrote a letter saying that I recognize the lion by its claws, and he was referring to Newton. So he read some solution of a problem, and it was evident to him that it must have been written by Newton and by no one else. And then truth, for sure. I mean, what is mathematics without truth? And in fact, there is a very nice book connecting these two keywords, truth and beauty, by S. Chandrasekhar, where he talks about several of these things. So my question is, given all these, analogies that I can see, so have you ever explored the connection of literature into, say, other realms of studies like maths or more, say, technical stuff than the humanities?
I can't say I have, and for that I'm going to blame my science teachers at school. There's a very easy way to to disclaim responsibility for this. By the way, I think the space where you and I connects us is in the last years I've begun to read the great science books and realizing that there's so much incredibly beautiful writing about them. And also, it's a place for me to grow as a writer. The Song of the Dodo by David Corman. Is this a book to any of you? It's a science book about evolution and island geography, written by someone who's a PhD in William Faulkner. An incredible bio to bring the science writing. And it shows in the book in all the delightful portraits of the scientists that David Corman writes about. And after reading that, I felt newly ambitious to move out into these fields, because every few years you feel like you have to enlarge the scope of your profession. If you get locked up within the things that you only are comfortable writing. So Timothy Ferris is coming of age in the Milky Way. Stephen Jay Gould, Richard Feynman, all these are utterly brilliant writers who bring out the quirks of the subject: dinosaur eggs, human bones. It's a real skill. And I think it's probably one of the areas in which last 30 or 40 years, it has really opened out as a special place in literature, literary science writing. I cannot go any further than I think the closest I've ever come to is trying to understand the science of mango grafting for this piece I was writing 5 years ago. I've seen one of the most beautiful trees in India. It's a graft made by this Lucknow mango grower, Kalimuddin Khan, with 25 or 30 varieties of mangoes on the same tree. And as you go around the mangoes in season, they change color. There's many different mangoes on the same tree. Now, that is a result of the science of Portuguese scientists in the 16th century when the Portuguese came to India. That is the story of it. I wish I had the technical and the scientific knowledge to do it, but I don't know what your science education was like. It's pretty pathetic in most Indian schools, isn't it? I can't remember any experience, bizarrely enough, from my school days of feeling that of revealing of a science teacher revealing the beauty of the world, the inner order of the universe through some experience of detail. And yes, in that way, I'm handicapped, but very conscious of being so.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Wait, question.
So the relationship between analytical and beauty, can you explain a little bit more or any difference?
To analyze is to work out the structure, the logic of something. So to almost make the to find the key, to analyze an artistic work, I found I actually learned how to write novels by reading literary criticism. So it's not to say that analysis it cannot also be a way of understanding creation. I love it when someone can show you the secret of a work, and the idea of writing or making art is to also conceal these secrets. So there is a back and forth between art and analysis that can be very productive of the experience of artistic exhilaration. That feeling in the beginning when you read a great book, you love it, but you can't quite understand what it's doing to you. You can go back to it later and look over it again and begin to break it down. And some people sometimes ask me, as a writer, do you read as a writer or do you read as a reader? Do you read to keep on enjoying the book, or are you stopping to ask, how did this happen? I think it's a combination of both. But in a sense, creation is bigger than, in the end, creation is bigger than the power of any analysis to define it. But that is not to say that analysis is not also useful to open paths to the sense of creation. Some small thing that I was trying to do now for instance, when analyzing that paragraph from Vibhuti-Bhushan, with analysis, you can not only see what is there, you can begin to think about what is not there and how that contributes to meaning. Gaps it's not possible to write poetry without thinking about gaps in the text. That silences create meaning. That jumps from one leap to another create meaning. So, and finally, nobody who loves art can also be free of the analytical sense. In that way, to be a rasika is, which is a very deep, has very deep history in Indian life. That art was created for patrons, and to be a civilized person is not only to be wealthy, but to be highly educated in the sophisticated ways in which art made its movements. Mudras, shlokas, all the forms and the shapes of art. So analysis can be a way to enjoy creation even more deeply than you could as a lay person. So everybody who loves literature, I think, owes it to themselves to begin a life in analysis too. And again, there are people who've been there before you, so you can walk on the shoulders of other people. This is one place where I wish it was easier, and this is where I blame Indian newspapers. For the longest time, the newspaper was a place which could give readers some sense of of the beauty of the world of ideas and filter down. Nobody has a chance to read an academic book every week of your life, but to read a review of it in a newspaper is to gain some sense of being in tune with the best that is being thought and said. And in these ways, I think the Indian media has really let down Indian life, because when did you last read a review of a play, a review of a book, or a review of a painting in an Indian newspaper? We are in denial of our own creative spirit, in a space where all these things could come together and everyone could learn and grow. That's why I really like book reviews, and I'm very committed to writing reviews, because it is a place where these two things come together, beauty and analysis, in the same, and you can move between one and the other. The very best book reviews are really magnificent. 700 or 800 words of perfectly formed thoughts that are very individual to somebody. Analysis can be really beautiful. As you know, from any of you who ever enjoyed like great lectures, great teachers. When I went to the university, this was it's amazing to watch somebody's mind move with no preparation at all. You look at it and follow your own train of thought.
It was an amazing talk, sir. So I had a couple of brief questions. So the first question was regarding this connection between literature and form. I mean, I am a part of Pallavi ma'am's amazing course called Citizen World Literature, where we studied this one book which has left a deep impact on me. It's Deepak Unnikrishnan's Temporary People. And there, I mean, each chapter had a different form. So that made me that kept me thinking that your comment regarding the form determines, sometimes the form can give you ideas and vice versa. So I was just thinking, in such books, like Deepak Unnikrishnan, where each chapter has its own different form, like some of it is two words poetry, and so what determines like, according to the author, I mean, what form would his writing take? I mean, that was my first question. And my second question is a bit more practical. I mean, as a author, as a reader yourself, I mean, I find that increasingly in this current era where technology and where social media and all of this is happening so rapidly, where attention spans are decreasing. So my question was regarding the act of reading, because we're talking about literature, we're talking about novels. I mean, what are the challenges that literature faces in this era where, where attention spans are decreasing, where nobody wants to read?
Yes.
Those were my two.
Can I just help us keep a handle on the time for a minute, because it's 6:28 and there is a question online.
What time are we trying to finish?
Around 6:35. I would imagine, if that's okay. I mean, unless people are okay to stay for maybe 5 minutes more.
Very quickly. Your second question first. There's lots of people lamenting their short attention spans. The very precise answer to that is no way to increase your attention span except by increasing it. Sometimes when I have writing students, I ask, can you spend the entire morning without your phone? Some people actually feel frightened of losing access to this, but you have to be able to do so in order to write well. There are just some things that are in and off. That is the truth of that road, and you only learn it with practice. I myself fall away from this discipline, and when I start writing seriously, I have to tell myself, remind myself these things. About form, literature is so beautiful only because the question of form is never sorted finally. Even novels, you will learn a lot with the technical vocabulary of novels, but every novelist finds, Pamuk, for instance, in A Strangers in My Mind, finds a way of mixing third-person narration with first-person narration. The frame is set out in third person, but within that, sometimes characters appear who never appear again, just speak the stories for a page or two and go off. Everything gives a sense of tremendous space inside the book. That is the desire. If you wanted to give a sense of claustrophobia, you would do something else. Think of what you are trying to do, and then the form has to be tuned to that effect. We'll take a question from...
Read it on the screen there.
Oh, yes.
You have spoken of beauty
as being one of the fundamental ways in which literature opens up our lives, but is there an inherent contradiction between the espousal of beauty and the way in which you talk about literature being democratic? Doesn't beauty as the concept demand a hierarchy or ordering of that which constitutes reality? yes, beauty does demand a hierarchy. As any division or separation or distinction between different things demands a hierarchy. My beauty might not be your beauty. We might agree on 100 things that are beautiful, but not on the 101st. And there would emerge some very deep issue or crux that would reveal something about the nature of beauty itself. If we are always to tie beauty and to imprison it within the overarching idea of hierarchy, I would suggest that in the end, we are going to lose more than we are going to get. It is better to accept beauty and to also criticize beauty and to criticize, I think another way in which this question we are told perhaps that some things are beautiful, or we are trained, or the structures of life make us feel that some things are beautiful than others. So sometimes the perception of beauty also involves unseeing something or unbeautifying something. Fair skin, or certain kind of symmetry, or certain things that are tied to other kinds of inequity. But beauty itself wants us to find beauty in other things which we, I don't find beauty limiting at all. Beauty itself is not interested in limiting itself. So to that extent, there are ways in which dropping beauty from the agenda does not solve the problems that we set out to solve by doing so. That is my problem with, I think this deserves a discussion. It's a question of, with a lot of nuance to it, which I cannot immediately, in a couple of minutes, work at. It's a sort of thing for a colloquium or symposium, and then everyone can come with the beauty setting, and then we can talk across
We
each
can
other.
also continue outside
Yes.
later. So if anybody wants to stay, there is.
I can't think of a life without beauty, or
Mm.
that is my goal or like sentences without beauty. That is what distinguishes creation of a high grade to me from. If we took out the idea of beauty, actually we make it easier for ourselves to be mediocre. Everybody's song, everybody's speech is worthy of attention, but there is a reason why one thing is more beautiful than the other. It's sometimes a direct result of how much work you put in. When I finish writing my book, I sit down over it again only to make it a bit more beautiful. The last work is always the hardest to do.
I think the last question is there on the screen. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take more questions, but books are available outside, and the author is here to sign them.
My question is, can fiction convey truths that non-fiction cannot? Yes. Although, non-fiction has also understood this, and shall I say it has begun to correct itself, or has it begun to steal the techniques of fiction? Somewhere between the two is the right answer. A lot of non-fiction now is also devoted to interiority and the subjective perception of truth in people, which is very nice. Fiction has an advantage over non-fiction in depicting truth, in that because characters in fiction are not real in the way characters in non-fiction are, you can make up truths in fiction that you cannot that you cannot in non-fiction. And that making up is not dishonesty, it's a greater kind of honesty, it's a greater kind of insight. If I met a character who in my head is a composite between 3 or 4 people I know, that person is an entirely new person with a new sense of truth. And fiction is a way of expanding truth as well as of making it. Also, because fiction is so much about interiority, in the end, the fiction is not just about the truth of content, it's about the truth of the way in which your mind works. And that is what I find fiction endlessly beautiful. The sequence through which you come to a certain perception in fiction, that is part of the fidelity of fiction. That is part of the method of fiction. It's not what is interesting in fiction is not so much what a person thinks, but how they've come to thinking that. And so something for which you criticize someone on page 1, in the end, fiction is about what I call the reason of unreason. We all think things that are almost impossible to defend, but there's a reason why we've got there. And the work of fiction is to show us the ways in which why we come to be the people we are and how we change. So yes, fiction is, as a fiction writer, I'm going to defend my side of the fence and say, yes, it can. But both fiction and non-fiction are literary in different ways, and I would not want to remove non-fiction from the table. Non-fiction is honest in different ways. Non-fiction writers are hardworking in ways that fiction writers are sometimes not. There's something to be said by talking to each other, which is why I like having friends in non-fiction they keep both sides keep each other honest, like in a marriage.
All right.
Okay, are we done? Huh?
Yes, on that wonderful note,
Okay.
thank you so much, everyone, on behalf of the Humanities and Languages Division of the School of Arts and Sciences. I'm Pallavi Narayan signing off.